are we allowed to sit?
Yeah. You may be seated.
You must
Mitch is the pastor. Yeah, let me get all these chairs and stuff out of the way so I can move around a little bit. I just wanted to welcome you guys out tonight. This is something that is very close to my heart, just being able to present something like this. For those of you who don't know me all that well, my future goal and end goal really is to become a pastor of a church. And I want to start that church and really make church different from what it was for me growing up. You know, not to say that the church that I grew up in was horrible, but a lot can be done to show God's love and God's image better than the way that I was raised. You know, and so that's just a little bit about my motivation, my passion, my purpose behind what I'm doing. And I'm so glad that you guys are able to be out here. You know, I'm not preaching in front of thousands of people or anything, but this is my first time preaching like one of these sermons in front of somebody, you know, for an extended time. So this is a very special moment for me. And I'm glad that you guys are the ones that I get to share that time with. So I have been in class, like many of us have. And I have gotten out to a decent semester so far. For those of you who are in school, I hope that you have not procrastinated as much as I have in these first 2 weeks of school. But let's just put it this way, I still have work to do when I get back tonight. But we're in one of the classes for my liberal studies requirements right now. And we started off the semester by watching a documentary, which was like phenomenal. You know, it's great. It's not at all what the rest of the class represents. However, it was great to start it out with a documentary, and it's the whole entire class for the most part. It's like kind of theme and topic is like the ecological citizen, right? So I'm going to use an illustration here real quick, and if you don't believe in climate change, just like plug your ears for a couple minutes. But we were watching this documentary that's hosted by Leonardo DiCaprio, and it's essentially a study that has been done and that is continuing to go on right now, where they being the scientific community and National Geographic, who's the producer of the video, is doing this extensive study about a misinformation campaign that happened and is still happening to some extent today, however, was most prevalent around the mid-1990s through mid-2000s, headed by ExxonMobil. And when Leonardo DiCaprio, when he was interviewing this one man who was a scientist who was trying to fight this misinformation campaign, he said something that was really, really interesting to Leonardo DiCaprio, and he said, they know that they don't have to convince the public, they just need to divide the public. They just need to confuse them just a little bit, and then nothing happens moving forward. There's no regulations on the amount of carbon that a company can put out, and there's no steps that are taken to the way that animals are treated, and the way that we grow crops, and the way that we produce these mass amounts of food, and these mass amounts of fossil fuels, and all it takes is a little bit of division in order to cause stagnation. And so, how many of you guys play Call of Duty? Call of Duty?
No.
Fans? Any kind of shooting game fans, you know? I remember even going to the little arcades and whatnot when you were little, and they would have those guns, or the game with the big shotguns and whatnot, and you're out there playing. Well, let's just say that I was never really allowed to play any of those games, and so by the time that I was able to get exposed to Call of Duty and whatnot, you know, all of my friends have been playing it for years and years at that point. And so they're like running circles around me, and I'm like struggling to stay alive. And these people are just like shooting me left and right and like winning this stuff. It's like, yo, you need to pick up the slack, man. Come on, we're gonna keep you off our team. And like, I cannot play Call of Duty. And I figured out recently that it doesn't work very well in real life either. I went to my friend's bachelor party weekend, and we ended up playing around a paintball. and I've only been paintballing once. I've gone paintballing once, and I will only go paintballing once because I'm absolutely terrible at anything related to a gun, apparently, right? And so it didn't help that this guy's bachelor weekend was up in Asheville. And when you go to Asheville, and you find paintballers out in the middle of nowhere, they know what they're doing, okay? Like, they are not, like, new to paintball. They have been playing paintball for the majority of their childhood, right? And these guys are, the guys that we played with at least were, you know, like, late teens, early 20s, in peak physical condition, like, ripped beyond belief, and then I'm there, like, with my skinny jeans rolled up, and I am not prepared for what is about to come my way. And so we split off into two teams, and when we split into the two teams, I must have got put on the loser squad, because like we had nothing going for us. You know, it seemed like the other team were trained in every single military, like, introduction, everything ever, right? And so when we were trying to establish our, like, plan, right? One of the bright ideas from one of the guys on the team was just like, okay, let's just split up, everybody do their own thing, you know, we get, like, you in a partnership, and, like, we'll just fight for ourselves, and, like, we're all going to be working towards capturing the flag for the other team, but, like, we're all going to do our own thing. And we were just like, okay, because none of us had anything better. So, you know, I went off with my little partner, and we started, we thought we were doing good at first, and I was shooting, and I was like, where's all the paint? Like, it's supposed to be hitting people, but it didn't. And the other team, I don't know what it was, but they had some type of tactical training where they realized, and I realized very quickly, that they were, like, encompassing and really closing in on me and my partner. And so him and I were just like, okay, we need to get out of here. Like, we are exposed beyond all belief. Like, let's run back to our base. At least it'll be good there. So him and I, like, run back, and we're running back. And so we get around the corner, and somebody from our own team, like, shoots me, like, right in the hip, right? Like, right below the belt line, like, really close to some really important stuff. And I was just like, okay, you know what, I'm done. Like, I had my gun up, and, like, I'd been shot, and I was like, I don't care if it's, like, friendly fire, like, I'm leaving, okay? I'm leaving. And so I walk away, and as I'm walking away, it doesn't help that I got hit in the back of the head by somebody who was shooting at me, even though my gun was up, whatever. And so let's just say after that, I was kind of done, right? And I showed my battle scar to somebody who was playing with me at the end, because everybody was like, oh man, check out this, like, we all look at this welt, man. And I was like, are you serious? That's it? Like, check out this. And everybody was like, oh my God. Like, and so, it was there for like 2.5, 3 weeks, like a solid bruise, like about that big. And yeah, it wasn't fun. But I realized that the reason, well, one of the many reasons, why we did not do very well is because our team was divided against itself. Everybody was out doing their own thing instead of working as a team and trying to accomplish the same goal. And so to kind of introduce this topic, right, I want to look at Luke 11, verse 23 real quick. I'm reading from ESV. I'll probably always read from ESV. I like to jokingly refer to it as the extra saved version. So I will read from that most of the time. So verse 23 says, whoever is not with me is against me. This is Jesus here talking. Whoever is not with me is against me, and whoever does not gather with me scatters. Wow, I had a very hard time with that verse. But this led me to realize that there are two different owners of everything in this world. Two different owners of your mind, of the mental positions that you have, about the battles that you fight. There are two different owners and two different sources that those can come from, and that's God and the enemy, Satan, the devil, whatever you want to call him, right? God and the enemy. And there are two owners to everything in this life, because as Jesus clearly lays out, whoever is not with me is against me, and whoever does not gather with me scatters. we are not big fans, and even to myself, I'm not a huge fan of absolutes. But this is pretty clear. But the reason why this is really important is because this causes a division. If you are not with God, you have caused a division with God. And if you are not gathering with God, you have caused a division with God. And so today I want to preach about, and the title for my message is Death by Division. Death by Division. So I want to read, we're going to back up in Luke 11 real quick, and I'm going to kind of walk us through that passage. So starting out, we're going to be starting at verse 14. It says, "Now he was casting out a demon that was mute. When the demon had gone out, the mute man spoke, and the people marveled. But some of them said, he casts out demons by Beelzebul." In KJV, this is Beelzebul. I learned that and looked like an idiot when I was first trying to pronounce it. So I had to look up my sources. So, he cast out demons by Beelzebul, the prince of demons. While others, to test him, kept seeking from him a sign from heaven. But he, knowing their thoughts, said to them, "Every kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and a divided household falls." Oops, I might have gone too far. Yep, and a divided household falls. Sorry about that. And if Satan is divided against himself, how will his kingdom stand? And so the first point that I want to talk about, it's in the title, but division. Division. And we have to understand that the enemy attacks us by division. That's how the enemy is able to get into our lives and start to draw us away from the things that we think are important, because the enemy will bring in just a little tiny crack. All it takes is a little crack into ourselves, and now he's caused a division in our lives. And we have to realize, first off, that cracks cause chaos. Right? Cracks cause chaos. They lead to a lot of crazy and ridiculous things. Like every single day that I go to class, I walk from my apartment across the street and through a parking lot. And whenever I walk through the parking lot, I see a whole lot of like little strips that you can tell were not there when the road was originally paved. And you know that they weren't there because even within the pavement that has been put there to cover up the cracks that have formed, it's still cracking, right? Like I don't think that you have to tear up the whole entire parking lot or anything, but you do have to patch it up every once in a while. You have to address the cracks that are there, because they know that if they don't address the problem when it's a crack, well, if you just let it continue to grow, then now you're going to start to have weeds pop up, and you're going to start to have other plant and other insects, and that's going to be overgrowth on the sides, and now you're going to have something where you're probably going to have to repave the whole entire parking lot just because you weren't willing to address it when it was cracked. And we have to understand that when there is a division, when there is a crack, that place is exposed. We don't have protection from that if we let it continue in its ways, because that crack eventually, the longer that we wait, the further that crack is going to grow. And the wider it's going to get, the longer it's going to get, the bigger of a divide it's going to be, the more, and I think that it's ridiculous that plants can grow through cement. Like, that boggles my mind. Like, I'd fall on the ground and I'd get a scratched knee, but a little tiny plant can stick its little head up through it, and I don't understand that. But eventually, you won't even know that the pavement's there if you let it grow long enough. If you look at places that have been abandoned, you couldn't even tell that there was a house there before, or that there was any signs of life there before, because the natural growth has just overtaken it. Where we don't address a crack, and when we don't address a division, there is no protection from anything that the enemy throws our way. When we have a crack in ourselves. If you have been around me at any point in a semi-deep conversation, you've probably heard me talk about cohesiveness. Cohesiveness is something that God has really convicted me about. And what I mean by that is, when I was going through life, really before I dedicated myself to following God, I lived in a state of pretending to be a person that I'm not around different groups of people, you know. And when I did that, I realized, like into my walk with Christ, that I wasn't being cohesive, right? And when I say cohesive, I mean in my character, right? The way that I carried myself was different around other people. And what God is really trying to been working in me is a cohesiveness. But you can't have cohesiveness when there are cracks, right? You can't address becoming whole if you don't address the things that keep you from being whole, right? Like, you cannot become cohesive until you deal with the cracks. And the last thing I want to talk about is that the cracks lead to a lot of things. Division leads to a lot of things in our life. I'm going through a study right now with my mom. We're reading Battlefield of the Mind by Joyce Meyer, which I'm reading. It's kind of funny. I've read Crash and Chatterbox and then Battlefield of the Mind back to back, which are phenomenal. You know, they're dealing a lot with kind of like the mental warfare that you go through every single day as a Christian. And so just like hearing their perspectives back to back and using them in tandem with one another has been really helpful for me. But while going through this, Joyce Meyer gives a definition of doubt, and I don't like have the quote or anything, but what she says is that when you have doubt, it's because you are wavering between two options. In order for doubt to exist, there has to be more than one option. So when you doubt God about what he can do in your life, that means that you are doubting him not just with himself, but with another option. In order for doubt to exist, you have to have more than one option, whatever that option is for you. That option is a result of a division. Because now you're indecisive and you're unwilling to take a step because now you have two different options. And the longer that you wait, the longer that you'll find it's harder to take that step the longer that you wait, because now you've let what was once a step turn into a bigger step, and then a bigger step. Now you gotta like leap to get there, and now you gotta run and jump to get there because you've let the crack continue to grow. And so the longer that you stay in indecision, the longer that you stay indecisive, you won't be able to move forward with that. And so Jesus says in verse 18 that a divided kingdom, divided against itself, cannot stand. And God's kingdom is no exception to that. In fact, I want to look at Romans 16, verses 17 and 18 real quick, where it says, I appeal to you, brothers, to watch out for those who cause divisions and create obstacles contrary to the doctrine that you have been taught. Avoid them. For such persons do not serve the Lord our Christ, but their own appetites. And by smooth talk and flattery, they deceive the hearts of the naive. And so, what I think is really important to draw from this is from verse 18, because it's talking about appetites, right? How division is linked to an appetite. Every division has an appetite, right? Paul here is saying people who act out of wanting to cause a division, wanting to cause confusion, wanting to cause a friction between people in the church, avoid them. Avoid them, because all they're doing is feeding their own appetite for pride, their own appetite for power, their own appetite for meaning in their life. And all that division is an appetite. So that means if you starve out division, then you won't have to deal with division. But the longer that you allow yourself to be caught in feeding and growing that gap, the longer you stay in your indecision, the longer you stay in your doubt, the longer you stay in your fear, then the bigger that crack is going to get. But as soon as you starve it out, then that division isn't going to be there anymore. And I think it's interesting because even like the Apostle Paul realizes, and he's addressing here, that the church is divided. He's writing to the Roman church, and he wouldn't say this if it didn't apply. And I think it's interesting how even from the beginning, the church has been divided. You know, you can go all the way back to Paul's time, and you have Peter, James, and Paul all preaching the same God, but with three different target audiences, with three different slight variations in the message that they bring about what laws you follow, what you don't, what you do, what you have to do, what you don't have to do. And already you're having divisions, and there's so much strife between all three of them that divisions are being made. And then you move forward, and now you have the Catholics, and they have the Bible being created, which, I'm very thankful for that. I'm very thankful that we have it. But the Catholics don't have a super clean slate themselves. They led crusades, which ultimately just divided the kingdom to the point where they viewed what the Catholics were doing as so corrupt that there's now a reformation being happening. And so now you have the kingdom of God being divided again into denominations, and now we live in the results of their decisions of dividing the kingdom of God. And I think that it's a necessary step, and that it was a really an unavoidable step based on where the kingdom of God had gotten to. But now we're living in a day where people identify as a Baptist before a Christian.
Come on.
And we're living in a day where people identify as a Presbyterian before a Christian, and people don't really understand that there's people outside of their little clique all fighting for the same cause. And everything that divides us to begin with is so meaningless that it has nothing to do with salvation, nothing to do with anything that truly and really matters, that we've let little cracks come into our faith and ultimately have led us to a point of divide that now we are so far apart, removed from one another, that now we're fighting a battle between ourselves rather than fighting a battle for the people who really need it. And so the kingdom of God is not free from this division. That's really what I wanted to make the point there. You have to fight division in yourself, but you also have to fight a division, whether it's in an organization or a group or a church or whatever it is. There's always going to be friction. I'm not going to agree with everything that Jeremy says, but we have to understand that we serve a bigger purpose than our opinion. And so when we let our opinions overtake the mission of what we need to do, then we can't have a mission with division. Doing that nice little Southern Baptist little rhyming term there, but no mission with division. But the next thing I want to talk about, is determination. Determination, and I've got a couple verses to set that up. So 18b, it starts out. This is now Jesus responding to the claims that he has been casting out demons by Beelzebul, and he says, "For you say that I cast out demons by Beelzebul. And if I cast out demons by Beelzebul, by whom do your sons cast them out? Therefore they will be your judges. But if it is by the finger of God that I cast out demons, then the kingdom of God has come upon you." And so the next point I wanted to talk about was determination. Now you can take this as a cute little double entendre if you want to, where you not only have to be determined in your walk to fight the divisions in your life, but also you have to determine the source of those divisions. And that's really what I wanted to talk about today, because right now we are fighting something. There's an obstacle that is in front of us, and that obstacle is owned by one of two sources, and that's either the God or the enemy. But like Jesus said, a divided kingdom cannot stand. So therefore, both Satan and God know better than to divide themselves. And so what Jesus is essentially saying to these people who accuse him of casting out a demonic spirit with a demonic spirit is, that doesn't make sense. Like, Satan is making himself look bad. All Satan would be doing, if this was the case, was making God look better. Satan doesn't divide himself for the purpose of spreading God's kingdom. That's not how the world works. That's what Jesus is trying to say. And so that's really important to realize, because that means that it takes an external source to cause a division. Right? You're not going to create a divide between you and God intentionally. It's going to take an external source to come in and tempt you, to draw you away from the source that you were there to begin with. But also, if you are stuck in a pattern of sin and stuck in somewhere where the enemy is in control, then it takes an external source in order to start to draw you away from that. It takes an external source. Satan is not going to divide himself, and God is not going to divide himself. And so, what I've really picked up from this is that we have to test everything with God. Because when we test everything with God, we get to determine its source. Because there's obstacles that we're facing in our life. And I would say, like, whenever you see an obstacle in your life, most of the time you assume it's from the enemy, right? There's something in my way that's stopping me, therefore it has to be the enemy. There's something that I should get past, but I'm having a hard time getting past, so therefore it's the enemy. I have a limitation within myself, a weakness within myself, so therefore it has to be the enemy, right? The God of all power and all strength does not want me to be weak. God doesn't want me to not take a step. So why would he limit me in any way in order to be able to take that? Every single time that we see an obstacle, we see it to be owned by Satan. But what I really, really want to drive home here, right? And I'm going to use the Apostle Paul. You can check me in 2 Corinthians 12, verses 7 through 10 if you really want to. But the Apostle Paul talks about the thorn in the flesh. The thorn in the flesh that he walks around with that is limiting him from moving forward and accomplishing really everything that he wants to do. In other letters that he has, he talks about, like, look, I'm nothing to look at. Like, I'm not a very attractive dude. Like, I'm not going to wow you with my appearance. Like, I'm going to be staggering in and hobbling in, but my strength is speaking. I don't need to walk good in order to speak good, right? That's what the Apostle Paul is trying to get over here. And so when he's talking about this thorn in the flesh, he sees that it's from the enemy, but it's allowed by God. That's his words. That's what he uses. And so we have to realize that sometimes the things that are against us, the source of what they are, if we test them with God and nothing happens, and if we test them with God and they don't become weaker, and we test them with God and they don't go away, then maybe they're from God. Maybe the things that you're facing in your life aren't Satan's way to blow up your whole entire purpose or your whole entire mission. Maybe that limitation is to keep you with God. Maybe that limitation that you're facing right now is a way for God to use himself in your life. That's the way that the Apostle Paul looked at it. And so the last couple verses in this passage, and it's kind of cool because I started at verse 23 and it kind of like loops back to 23. I did it on purpose. But it says, verse 21, when a strong man, fully armed, guards his own palace, his goods are safe. But when one stronger than he, how many are happy that we serve a stronger than he God? We serve a God who is stronger than anything that comes against us. But when one stronger than he attacks him and overcomes him, he takes away his armor in which he trusted and divides his spoil. The last thing I want to talk about real quick is dependence. Dependence. We've talked about division and how the longer we let division and the more that we feed division, the bigger it gets, the more that we draw it away. And we realize that in order to get rid of division, we have to starve it, but we aren't going to starve something that's from God, so we have to test it. We have to determine the source of where it comes from in order for us to really start to see that division start to be overcome and that crack start to be healed and that division start to be healed. But we can only do that by having the dependence on God. A dependence on God. And so when this passage is talking about the strong man, right, I think it's very, very important to realize the language that's being used, because there's this conflict between the strong man and the stronger man. But we have to realize that the strong man is still strong. Satan is a strong man. That's the illusion and the picture that they're trying to make here, is that there's a strong man, which is Satan. And when Satan is in charge of his own palace, right? When we don't introduce something stronger to the strong man, he takes hold of the things that he has a hold over. So what that's telling me is when strength is not confronted, strength is not changed, right? When strength is not challenged, strength is not grown. Strength is not changed. Strength is not changed when we don't attack it with something that is bigger than what it is. And so the devil will continue to have a hold on your mind, on your life, on your actions, on your beliefs, on your doubts, until you introduce a stronger man to overtake it. We can't expect the enemy to weaken himself because we ask him to. We have to fight the enemy, the strong man, and I think it's an important relationship to understand, because in order to call him strong, that means that you have to be less strong than him, right? You're not going to call a strong man strong if you can bench press more than he can, right? You're going to call him a little wimp, right? Yeah, Jeremy can probably bench like twice I can. That's so good. But you're not going to speak about strength with somebody who doesn't have strength. You can only give the title strong man to somebody who is inherently strong. And so we have to understand that we have to attack it with a stronger God. So when strength is unchallenged, strength is unchanged. And what's crazy is that we have a God who can repair the division. You and I are all sitting here because we are reliant upon a God who has created a bridge from the divide that our lives have caused. We have all created a division from God through sin, but God is a God not interested in the divide itself, but rather getting to the person on the other side of that divide. That's the God we serve. We don't serve a God who looks at us any differently because we fed the division a little bit longer than somebody else, and now we got 8 feet to cover rather than 7. God doesn't look at us any differently because the cross stretches over whatever division we create. We have a God of gaps and of divisions. And whatever division you have and whatever gap you have, you can give to him, and that will be repaired. It will be healed, right? All the enemy is going to do is he's going to come in, and now he's going to draw you so far apart and make you so focused on the gap that's there that you forget that there's a way to get back across. That's all that the enemy's going to do in your life. And so, not only does God repair the divide, but he also develops the divide as well. I'm going to go back to Paul real quick, because he eventually comes to a point where he's talking about the thorn in his flesh, and he's thankful for it. He's prayed for it to go away 3 times. That's what he said. He said, I've prayed to the Lord 3 times that this be taken from me, and he hasn't taken it. Therefore, I accept it. That means that he did exactly what I was trying to explain, where he tested and he determined the source of his thorn in the flesh, because he realized that if he were to overcome that thorn in the flesh, then he would become filled with pride and filled with a big head and filled with an ego, and now he's not going to rely on God at all, which is the only reason why he is where he is, and he has the power to do and say whatever he does, and gives him the authority to reign over and preach the message that God has delivered to him. But the thorn in the flesh is what keeps him dependent upon God. And he's okay with it. And he's okay with that. And so not only can God repair the divide, but he can also use the divide. Because what we have to understand is the bigger gap, the more room there is for God to work. So don't be caught in the fact that you've let this division get so big in your life, because you can't do anything to make your sin go away. You have caused that divide to get there. And we have a way to get back across, yes, but if you let God fill the division that you created, then he can make something so much bigger out of it than what you could ever do by yourself. And so I just wanted to close this in a time of prayer. I'm done. I'm wrapped up. I'm done. We have to first see the division, test it with determination, and then we have to depend on God to get back to it in order to avoid death by division.